in the Acton Academy model, you know, you didn't even refer to them as teachers. You referred to it as a guide.
Right.
So in that Socratic method, which I think that's one of those words that people think they know what it means, but they
Right.
don't actually know what it means. Can you explain why in Acton there's a guide and not a teacher?
Right. So we don't actually, we say like in traditional classroom, you have the sage on the stage, right? So the focus is on the teacher. They have all the knowledge, and their job is to put that knowledge into children, right? That's the model. We believe all children are geniuses, and I don't mean intellectually. What we mean by that is all children have their own unique talents and gifts, and everybody has that special gift in them, and we're there to help them bring that out. So if you believe somebody's a genius, you probably treat them a little bit differently, right? So we don't establish this hierarchical model where I say, I know more than you do, right? So the guide and the learners, as we call them, we don't even call them students, or we call them heroes, are on the same level. Yes, the guide is an adult and they have responsibilities for safety and schedule and some other things, but there's no hierarchy there. So that's why we make the distinction. So the guide is never teaching anything. So the guides introduce things and then let the learners kind of decide how they feel about things. So we're never going to say, this is the right answer about this thing in history. That's not how it works. We'll introduce something and then say, what do you think? Let's debate it. So the Socratic method really, you go back to Socrates, it's a method of teaching by asking questions, right? And what I always tell people is I have very strong opinions about a lot of different issues, and I know my guides do as well, right? But if any of the learners ever know how I feel about an issue or the guides, we failed, right? So our role is to facilitate discussions, but not actually to indoctrinate, which happens a lot in school.
Yeah. And I'm trying to balance two thoughts here. I'm trying to balance, yes, this is exactly the way that school should be taught, hence the reason I gave you my money and enrolled my child. And
Thank you.
Child number 2 starts in January. And I'm like, well, you get a bunch of 6-year-olds together and they decide that Santa Claus was our first president instead of George Washington. Right. At some point, there is factual knowledge that the guide as an adult knows and the children don't know.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that? Because I don't want my 6-year-old to think Santa Claus was the first president because all the other 6-year-olds like Santa Claus more than they like George Washington. Right. So how do you compensate for factual truth versus like letting the kids discover their own truth? Like this is a question I meant to pose to you in the interview process, and I'm like, whatever, this guy seems pretty smart. Seems smarter than me. He used to be a Top Gun pilot. I trust him. Whatever, he'll figure it out. But I was like, well, wait a minute. What happens if the kids establish an actual falsehood as like their belief? Does the guide then step in and be like, no, reality check, now I'm putting on my teacher hat?
No, that's an awesome question. So what you see a lot of times is like somebody will throw out something and they'll say, Abraham Lincoln was the first president. Or somebody actually said this last week. Abraham Lincoln was the first president. And then what immediately happens? Somebody else is like, bullshit.
Really?
Oh yeah.
At that age?
Already happened.
Amazing.
Already happened. So from the guide perspective, what we can do at that point is, can you bring me back can you go find a book or a source from the internet, multiple sources from the internet that prove what that statement you just made is true? Right? So we actually teach them how to do research, right? So you can say whatever you want, but then somebody's going to call you out and say, can you prove that with the real source? And if you can't, it's not going to fly, right? So a lot of times, we don't give children as much credit as they do. Children are way more capable than we actually think about it. Because if you go back and you think about it, even to the 1700s, 1800s, 12, 11-year-olds, what were they doing? They're going to war, right?
Yeah.
And then now, 12, 11-year-old, can barely, dress themselves, right? They're capable. So, when you give them the space to actually prove what they can do and think, they will surprise you every single time.